Hey everyone, welcome back to Peak Human. I'm Brian Sanders. Just had a great discussion with Gabor Erdosi, back for round two. Really interesting guy. I'm telling you, this one's great. This one is all about metabolic health and visceral fat and what you can eat to avoid metabolic dysfunction and getting that visceral fat. We get into some details. It was great though. I'm telling you, I think we made it easy to understand by the end. I would listen to the whole thing, even if it's flying over your head. He has a background in molecular biology. He has a background in the food industry. He was across enemy lines. He worked for the processed food industry, got insight on all their practices and really what's wrong with processed foods. And we kind of had a new revelation of why specifically processed foods are bad. Check out some of his old lectures online. They're on YouTube. Check out what he does with Ivor Cummins, my man, Ivor Cummins. They're the metabolic duo together. Check out Nose to Tail, nosetotail.org. We got the great meat there, regenerative stuff, body care. Check out the Yes to Meat newsletter. Go to yes2meat.org with the number 2, yes2meat.org. Thanks for sharing with a friend and telling people about Peak Human, going back to the beginning, checking out all the old episodes. Give us a review on iTunes, always helps, or any podcast app. We got a Patreon actually, /Peak Human. You can get all the extended show notes, support the show. And I think you'll really like this episode with Gabor Erdosi on metabolic health, how to really get down to the roots of things. We talk about the calorie balance stuff as well. This is a great case for why you need to eat an ancestral diet, why meat is good, why processed foods are bad. I love it. Check this one out. See you next week. Hello, Gabor Erdosi. How's it going?
Thanks for inviting me, Brian. I'm doing fine. How are you?
I'm good. We're back. We did a show years ago. I love that show. You had some great presentations online and you've continued your research since. You're kind of known as the metabolic duo with Ivor Cummins, a favorite guest of mine and a pal. And man, so many interesting things to talk about. We're just talking about how you moved away from the city up into more of the mountains, village area. Like, let's start with that. That's great. People love that. Where you're growing some food, having some animals.
Yeah, we decided to move out from the city. We just hated the bad air quality and the noise and the time spent in traffic jams and everything that comes with a bigger city. So last year we moved to a tiny village, a bit up in the mountains, but not very high, and bought a house with a vegetable garden, an orchard, with some more option to buy more of the hillside orchard, and plan to have some goats in the near future. We have some chicken, uh, free range, of course, and collecting the eggs. Yeah, crystal clear air and spring water from the taps. Absolutely clear. I think in our small, tiny street, we have something like 4 or 5 cars a day passing.
Mhm.
So very very quiet and really easy to relax after a working day, for example. Yeah, but working day includes the work in the garden.
That's great. Well, you're living the dream. Uh, we were also talking about your work history. You're a molecular biologist and you've worked in the food industry, worked in all kinds of interesting technical fields. And then along the way, you've just done your own research about food and food processing. And yeah, kind of turned a corner on, well, I don't know if you ever believed in the modern idea of nutrition, but you did work for the quote enemy, right? You did work for the bad guys in the processed foods, and I know you're very against the processing of foods, and you've learned so much about how that interacts with our body. So we talked about that last time, but let's go over a bit of it again, and I can direct people to check out that old episode as well.
Yeah, I think looking back, I now recognize myself as the odd pattern recognition guy. So I always had troubles at work when I worked for large corporations. I always had this click when I figured that they had these nice mission statements and everything, and underlying they had some not so perfect practices or ideas, and I think I actually I was ousted at least from two jobs due to this in the past, when I recognized that, wow, you guys are making processed food crazy cheap, but the sister company is the largest diabetes drug manufacturer in the world. So that's kind of a business model to have. And yeah, the next day I was invited to a tough discussion, and we decided that they couldn't risk that I face the customers with such messages. Of course, I didn't have any intention to, but yeah, that's kind of a threat. So yeah, well, that's I think also why sometimes I find myself on the side of so-called conspiracy theorists, because I tend to see some patterns which I think then that there is some underlying cause. Somebody moves the strings, and it's not actually totally accidental or by chance how things have been developing. But yeah, anyway, that's how life is. Yeah, I had first I worked in the medical devices industry, worked with surgeons, all kinds of surgeries. I spent a lot of time in ORs, and then I had the experience with the masking. Actually, my colleagues were educating surgeons and OR staff how to wear and what mask and what masks are good for. So I immediately had an alarm bell when something like 3 years ago somebody came with the idea that mask would be a great addition against the fight for viruses, which which I found just funny, because I listened to this education in the OR many times, and I knew, and then I had to read a couple of more recent reviews about this, but I think it was kind of unequivocal that masks were not really efficient against viral infection. Anyway, after that, I jumped ships, and then I worked in the industrial biotech, industrial enzymes, microorganisms, fermentation, and these kind of things, and among others, helping big food processors make their nice ultra processed foods or ingredients manufacture cheaper and cheaper, and with bigger and bigger profits. And then actually I joined one of these kind of then customers. So I worked in high fructose corn syrup production, also producing other glucose syrups and maltodextrins, industrial ethanol. And then I started supporting the sales guys, the syrup sales guys, for example, how to best use in different areas like confectionery, beverages, and these kind of things. So I know the food industry in and out. I was kind of an expert, also advising manufacturers how to improve their processes. And later, somewhere along this, I gained quite some weight. I was something like, I don't know, well, it was 270 pounds in pounds, so it's above 130 kilos. And I decided to look into this. I was too lazy to start exercising a lot more and eating less and counting calories. So I just had to look into how was there anything else I could do, something lazy type of weight loss. And I think I started out on Atkins almost 10 years ago, and I started losing weight like crazy. And I did a lot of experiments because I couldn't believe that eating so much fat after the induction phase would still result in such a quick weight loss. I remember adding butter on Brazil nuts between meals and eating those twice a day at least, and still kept losing weight. I couldn't believe it. And then I got enthusiastic and started listening to these audiobooks and reading blogs and everything. And I got even more enthusiastic and started going back to basic research and started reading research papers. And ever since, I think I haven't read a single book. I mean, nutrition or lifestyle related book. I only read scientific papers or sometimes opinion pieces, but no more blogs and no more books.
Mm.
So
Straight to the source.
I think over time you develop a kind of a sixth sense, what is worth reading and what is not.
All right, quick interruption to talk about nosetail.org. This is how this podcast exists. We support our ranchers here in Texas. Help us help you get the best meat possible. They've been doing regenerative stuff for 30 years. Alan Savory taught grandpa way back in the day how to do the correct management of the animals, how to get the best quality meat, how to regenerate the land, get it straight to your door in the 48 states. We offer some shipping discounts. Go to nosetail.org. You can also get the body care products there. No funny stuff, just some essential oils, some great fat, and a little bit of natural oil for the best stuff for your skin. We even got deodorant. We have hair care. We got it all. Check it out, nosetail.org. Thanks, everyone.
Recently, in one of my recent assignments, I was asked to outline my research practices, how I differentiate between good research papers and bad research papers, and I realized that I don't really have a well defined method. I just developed over the years that I look at a paper and I have a feeling that they had actually a good reason to run the research, because that's always important, that there is a hypothesis they want to pursue. They have an idea how things could work, and then they go after it with the research design. And then, even before going to have a look at the graphs and the tabs and things like that, I tend to read at least a part of the introduction phase, because the best researchers can write crazy good introductions and provide very good references. I think it's already a good sign of what to expect later in the paper, what quality, the introduction quality. Most people, I think, don't care about the introduction at all. I think I developed the taste for good intros. And if the intro is bad, very often I just drop the paper immediately, because I feel that the researchers do not reach the standard of what I usually raise.
Can you sniff out if it's sort of industry funded or they have a bias or something like that?
I think it's important to check the conflicts of interest, for example, but I never start with that. And actually, I can list quite a few papers which were written by industry finance people, and then I still find it robust and well designed and not very much biased. And in those cases, the bias is very easy to extract out, because you are aware of the bias, and you can just kind of deduct the biased stuff, and then you have a great research on your hand. And then I think in other cases the conflict of interest is not stated, but you can still feel that it's heavily biased. And then you look after the authors, and you do find a lot of conflicts of interest. So I don't think it's a very good guide in itself. I think it's best to develop this own evaluation standards, even if these are kind of inadvertent or not really methodologically strict or anything. You don't have to have your bullet points of what I check or do not check. But eventually, if you read papers by the hundreds or by the thousands after many years or decades, it comes, and yeah, it's just practice and experience, I think.
Yeah. So, and then do you have sort of a high level kind of general consensus of what you found after all this research? I mean, we're going to get into it in this episode, but yeah, where does it
Yeah,
take?
I think I can talk a lot of this as a journey, because where I started and where I'm at now, and I cannot even imagine where I will be in 5 or 10 years, because it has changed so much. Um, I started looking into metabolic diseases, because obesity and diabetes and these seem to be closely related at the very beginning. So, like 9, 8, 9 years ago, when I started reading a lot of papers. And first I had an idea that okay, glucose utilization, fat burning, it has a lot to do with muscles, because your muscle mass is so big, and your muscle is so active, metabolically speaking, that everything must happen in the muscle. So I had a kind of a muscle centric start. And then I realized that, okay, glucose, lipids, how it is regulated. Your liver is much more involved in this regulation part than your muscles. So I shifted my readings to the liver. And then I recognized that, yeah, when you have metabolic problems, you usually have fat deposition in your liver. And okay, but where is this fat coming? It's just building up there, or it's coming from somewhere else, like from your diet or from your fat storage. And then I realized that up to two-thirds of the fat stored in the liver comes from your fat storage. So it's not produced there, or it doesn't mainly come from your diet. It's coming from adipose tissues, the fat storage. And then I became obsessed with adipose tissue biology. At one time, I was even called the Adipocyte Jedi by some of my friends, and I even had a Facebook page. I remember the Adipocyte Jedi. You can still find it probably, but it's been abandoned for quite some time. And I looked into very, very much details, and I think it's still very important to have an idea about adipogenesis. That's the creation of new fat, and then it leads you to the to the personal fat threshold hypothesis, adipogenesis, and why adipogenesis, the creation of new fat, is blocked, or why it behaves like an endless process in some people. Those people who become 800 pounds and cannot be removed from their apartments only through the wall when they need to be hospitalized, for example, those people are never diabetic. And yeah, I think adipose tissue plays a very important role. But what defines, or what influences, determines adipose tissue function? Not mainly mass. I think it's more about function than mass. It's always about function in biology and not mass. We tend to be obsessed with mass, how much muscle mass you have, and these masses correlate quite well with function. So higher fat mass correlates with worse function, and higher muscle mass correlates with better metabolic function, and that's fine. But on an individual level, I think it's function that matters,
Mm.
and we are not. None of us are really interested in what happens in population levels. We are not epidemiologists. I really despise epidemiology now. The infectious diseases and nutrition epidemic, all kinds of epidemics. I don't really like. It's not a secret, but anyway, I think that much of the insults which eventually arrives to the liver or to the adipose tissues originates from barrier surfaces, from the environment, because these are all environmental impacts, or clues what the body translates. So when you want to investigate what happens when you are exposed to certain environmental impacts, how the body reacts, then it's really a dynamic interaction, and you have to consider how these influences arrive, how they are translated, and then it always has to do something with a barrier between the outside and the inside. And those barriers are in your mouth, your skin, of course, and then you have your mucus barriers, where you have these membranes within your mouth, within your gut, within your genital surfaces, and so on and so forth. So those are very important barriers. And what happens at that barrier surfaces, I think, is the most exciting part of contemporary biology. So I kind of ended up at gut interactions between foods, between food additives, between whatever comes from the environment. It can be air pollution, because those particles you inhale eventually end up in your gut because you swallow what comes up from your lungs. You swallow and it ends up in your gut. So almost everything connects to these barrier surfaces. So most recently, I've been looking into gut microbes, immune interactions, and how that influences systemic metabolism and outcomes.
Oh man, so much. This is great. You go a level deeper. Yeah, I love that because some people are just like, oh, it's just people get fat and it's bad, or muscle is good, or but it's like, why did people gain fat? It's like it's not just because you ate too many calories. It's way more complicated than that, which is what I love because I hate the people out there. They're just like, oh, this guy ate too many calories. I'm like, this is the stupidest explanation. This is it's kindergarten level. You need to go way deeper,
Yeah,
and
that's
that's what
very
you do.
primitive, and already I think it already doesn't um, incorporate very basic thermodynamic principles. Like uh, humans have kind of goals and why things happen. They have these preconceptions due to their own biases and how they perceive that things should work. And I think that doesn't exist in physics, chemistry, or even biology. Things can very often go both ways, including biology. It's very difficult to model, for example, biology without creating all the loops and feedbacks, and then you are thinking about cycles all the time. That oh, we have this vicious cycle again, and I think thermodynamics, like the second law, it also won't tell you which direction the causality should go,
This
because
is super
of course the
important.
mass, I think
Yeah.
it's mostly not energy but mass, but we can apply energy and mass together, or you can substitute mass with energy. It doesn't really matter in this case, I believe. But uh, you cannot really know that weight gain is happening because there is a signal to store, and then you get hungry and start eating more to fulfill that kind of a storage drive. That's perfectly fine in biology, and physics won't tell you that the direction is this way or that way. But people assume that you have these bad habits, you are gullible, and you keep eating too much, and then that stimulates the gain of fat. And I think that's a problem, that you already have this strong assumption included in your
Mm,
model.
yeah.
And if you cannot get rid of that, you have zero chance to step back and have another solution proposed.
Yeah, just to make sure people know what we're talking about. The second law of thermodynamics, people just talk about this energy balance, and the mainstream idea is just, yeah, you ate too many calories because you're a slob and you just got fat. And you're saying it could go both ways. It's like, why did someone eat too many calories? Or, what came first? I think it's Jason Fung, Dr. Jason Fung, who's been on the show, talked about like a growing teenager. They're like, oh, these people eat so much. It's like, did they were growing, and is it just because they just ate so much and then they just grew taller and grew into like a man, or is it that their body drove them to eat more to support them growing?
Yeah, there was a signal first. I think biology, it's always a signal first, and then things happen following that signal, because we are adaptive organisms, and then if you have a strong signal, we just behave accordingly. So the physiology follows the signal. And the question is, I'm not saying that, I'm not even saying which way it works, because I don't perfectly know. I don't think that we have a lot of studies specifically to discern that it's this way. So it's a pull, kind of a pull, or it's a kind of a push. What happens? So as long as studies are not designed to have this basic understanding that there is a signal and then a push, or there is an external problem, and that there is not a pull but a push, an external push. It's impossible to say. It could be both.
It's gonna be both. Yeah, yeah. It could be both, but it's a good example of you changing what you ate and producing weight loss effortlessly. So it's I like to start there. It's like you change what you ate and that provided different signaling to your body to do something. So yeah, where does this change happen? With I mean, you talked a lot about processed foods. Like, what is going on there?
Yeah, you can be, I think, absolutely certain that what the most important thing you changed with the food was the signaling. So the only question is what type of signaling was changed. Was it a hormonal at the gut level, because that's the first place where the food interacts, or strongly interacts, because already the smell and the vision can have impacts, but the biggest impact comes from the gut interactions between food and and uh, and gut hormones, for example. So what signalings have you changed with the food? That should be the first thing to look.
Well, and also you also said you didn't exercise. It's funny you said the lazy approach because a lot of people are they don't want to, have to do tons of changes and fit in all these workouts. Not saying that workouts are bad, but that it really was just the food was the specific thing that you change and that can be the change. But so go on though. Go a level deeper into the signaling and what processed
Yeah,
foods.
yeah. Just a side note on exercise. I think exercise is very important. It can
Oh
be,
yeah.
for example, one of the factors, or maybe the single biggest factor, which can decouple weight and metabolic health. What I see is that those people who are obese but are very active, physically active, those people are usually see a lot better metabolic health than the obese who are inactive.
Oh yeah.
So it can be a kind of a switch between metabolic health and metabolically unhealthy, even if you are obese. So I think physical activity is important, but of course there are times, and if you really want to do a scientific experiment, you have to control as many factors as possible. So you would make sure that you only change diet if you want to make sure that a big dietary change alone can result in a big change in weight, for example, or metabolic health, whatever your goal is. My personal goal is metabolic health and not really weight. I couldn't care about having some parts of the year having a little bit of love handles or whatever. It comes and goes, and I don't even measure myself.
Well, you look like you're a good weight. You look like a normal weight, normal human.
More recently, I've been trying to gain a little bit of weight with some of my experiments. It's not easy if you understand, if you believe you understand that how it works. I can eat a lot of stuff which people would normally consider junk food and still not gain weight. And I have my practices against to compensate for the bad quality food. And that's one area where I have been researching, but it's difficult to convince people other than myself to try out actually those practices, because at the end of the day, I think in the long run, what I would like to achieve is a lifestyle intervention. Big part is dietary intervention, where you can apply the Pareto effect, like in
80%.
putting in only 20% of the effort, but reaping 80% of the benefit. Because I think adherence is very important. Uh, Now coming to the population level, that most people find it much easier if they don't have to follow the many strict rules and counting, and a couple of uh, easy rules. I think that would, if it could make a big difference, that would be really nice. And I still believe that having a better mechanistic understanding could lead us to this place where we could invest only 20% of the effort and reap 80% of the benefit.
Well, what are those rules? We should just give some people some actions right away, and we'll go into more
Yeah, I
detail.
think quite a few I already outlined in my food news talk, which was 5.5 years ago. So it's freely available online. I think it's pretty much technical, but if you only check the summary and the practical takeaways, I think it still stands. And I haven't really found anything against those I outlined more than 5 years ago, or recognized more than 6 years ago. So anything I found, I could only add to refine or make it stronger, but there was nothing which went strongly against what I was preaching back then, and I think that's a good sign, because I don't think that I'm heavily biased towards these things. As I told you, I've been shifting a lot in my scientific views. I've been experimenting on myself a lot. I don't really care if I gain a few kilos, and yeah, I think I want to be certain that these actually work as I think they do.
So yeah. So what are those?
Yeah,
So
I identified. I call it AAA, but some people told me that this AAA is not really a good abbreviation because it stands for too many things which I'm not aware of. But I still can remember it as AAA. It's accelerated appearance and absorption. So that's what underlies, I believe, at least most problems of modern food environments and human physiology. So when you have these ultra processed foods full of refined carbs and added fats appear too quickly in your small intestinal tract, and it will result in an accelerated absorption, and that changes the signaling in a very profound way, which can be described by hormonal and immunological and other parameters pretty well. So I think that's the basis. And then when you adopt this view, you can start designing the actual interventions which could prevent or reduce this effect of bad foods. And if I want to mention an example, it's for example food order. So you have a kind of an average meal, uh, like you have some vegetables or salads, you have some meat, and you have some quick absorbing carbs as sides, like pasta or potatoes or whatever people generally add as sides. And you also have a dessert, something sweet, and it matters a lot how you consume this whole package. If you start with something which can slow down the absorption of the bad food items, then the metabolic effects are profoundly different compared to if you, for example, follow a reverse order. So you see all the hormones dampened, your glucose, your insulin, your gut hormones. Of course, I should have said it the other way around, because it starts with the gut hormones and then it's glucose and insulin. And you see the reduced inflammatory signaling by the cytokines and so on and so forth. So I think what I try to arrange it around this concept of accelerated absorption. And then if you can reduce the speed of absorption, you eliminate much of the bad effects of these foods.
So to make it clear, this is a bit of like glucose goddess. If people have heard of her, she's on Instagram. There's a lot of people doing this stuff with CGMs and the glucose monitors to show this, that if you eat something like a salad with, maybe that has some vinegar dressing, then you have like the meat and protein and fat, and then you kind of move to the starches and the sweets, that's the best order, and it dampens this glucose response and insulin response.
Yeah, but normally I think very often what you see when you follow different parameters and not only glucose is that glucose is not a good marker of what's happening. Glucose only starts going up really high when you are eating the worst junk foods. And as soon as you start mixing different food items, this glucose peak disappears, but you can still have high insulin response. Or when insulin response also disappears or stops being a marked spike, the gut hormones can still be disproportionately high. So it depends on mixtures, and I don't really like to rely on glucose only. And that's why I've never had the intention to try out a CGM. I'm not a big fan of CGMs because glucose is a marker which can point out only the worst kind of foods. Everybody knows that you eat a I don't know, a donut or whatever, then you will have a bad
So,
response to
yeah.
that. Yeah, but what if you eat a meat and a donut? And you won't see a bad response by glucose. And was it perfectly fine or not? You just don't know. But if you investigate all the mechanisms and a lot of studies which look at different combinations of foods, and you understand the basic underlying mechanism as accelerated absorption, the pinpointing the real problem, then you can address that specific problem, and then I can tell you if you list a range of food items, if you eat it this order, there will be no problem. If you change the order, then it's much more risky. There are very good tests. For example, when yeah, both animal and humans, when the researcher used a special sugar. It's a kind of a sister sugar of sucrose, the table sugar, consists of the same basic molecules, one molecule of glucose and one molecule of fructose, but they are attached at different carbon atoms. So the 3D configuration is a bit different. And this changes everything because you have an enzyme, it's called sucrase, the enzyme which splits sucrose into the two individual sugars. And this enzyme has a much lower affinity to this alternative sugar because of the 3D configuration. In biology, how it looks and how atoms go around matters a lot. And enzymes can be very specific. So when how the sugar actually looks in 3D changes a little bit, it can have a profound impact on the enzymatic activity. So it means when you eat this alternative sugar, and the end product is absolutely the same. It's 100% processed or 99 point something percent processed in the small intestinal tract, similarly to table sugar. What you see is that it has completely the opposite metabolic response. So some Japanese studies used 50-50% mix of these two sugars, and they saw improvements even in diabetics just by mixing these two types of sugar. And the basic research went that, of course, they tried the pure sugar, but it was much more interesting when they mixed the sugar to regular meals. And when they uh, had the participants, animals or people, snack on the sugar all day long, it made a huge difference what sugar they added to the regular meals. And it was, I think, in the animal models, they followed all gut hormones and insulin, glucose, everything. And what they saw was that the difference between glucose responses disappeared as soon as the normal food was added, and insulin response was very similar, so very small differences, but the gut hormone responses remained still disproportionately high uh, compared to when they consume this alternative sugar compared to the table sugar. And only the animals consuming the table sugar develop fatty liver. Those consuming the alternative sugar had no metabolic problems. And this is chemically exactly the same, calorie wise,
Wow.
exactly the same stuff, the same two molecules, the same metabolism. As soon as it's absorbed, it's everything is the same. The only difference is how quickly it is absorbed.
That's super interesting. I always like to go to the root cause, right? One level deeper. So it's like, why are processed foods bad? Right? I'm like, I get it. And there's could be multiple reasons, right? It's like, why are processed foods bad compared to whole foods? And there's many reasons, but you're getting into the why. And is the biggest why the accelerated absorption?
Yeah, I still believe that it's the biggest, but there are several factors, and it's not only food. First of all, it's not only food. I think there is a lot of things that change in our environments, like sleep patterns and exposure to different chemicals and food additives and air pollution. But these also have some kind of common uh, joining point in the gut. But still, I think that the
Some
elephant in
even.
the elephant in the room is still, for most people, it's the food itself. Uh, I saw people with extremely bad sleep habits, like sleeping 3 4 hours every day from 3 a.m. to 6 a.m. or something like that, or 3 to 7, depending on the day. And whatever diet I prescribed, there was no help. They lost a little bit at the beginning, but then it stopped, and the beer belly persisted, and everything. And then you need to change your sleeping habits, because it can also be a dominant factor. But otherwise, I think for the vast majority of people, it's food related.
And specifically just going to the unprocessed versions of food. And also what I mean, what we can skip ahead too. Like what are these foods? I mean, these are natural animal foods.
Yeah, yeah. I think people with not so good intentions, or with some biases, with whatever dietary religion, they often use the processing. You talk about processing, and oh, your sausage is totally processed. How many steps of processing there was, and the similar things. Yeah, but I say that the mechanism is accelerated absorption. Processing your meat into sausage will have zilch to do with absorption. Nothing. Even if you completely process, I mean, the heaviest processing you can do to protein or meat is hydrolyzing the protein into the individual amino acids, and then drink the amino acids separately.
Protein
it
shakes.
will
Yeah.
it will have a small impact. It will have a little bit worse profile, metabolic profile, hormonal responses, and so on. But it's small. You won't get obese or diabetic from drinking amino acid mixes. Even though I don't recommend that you substitute your whole meals and only drink hydrolyzed amino acids or protein. But you must understand, if you understand the if you get the hang of the mechanism, you understand that this type of processing is not a big problem. And the big problem is when you have a starchy or sugary plant, fruit or grain or something like that, which is not really a proper. Often it is not a proper food for humans at all. Like eating grains, I don't think it's a good idea at all. But when you process the crap out of it, sorry for the wording, then it becomes so much worse. Then it is out of your graphs. The metabolic responses are really cannot be fit into your screen. So that's the real problem when you have something which you eat. It's not really for humans, but it's still relatively benign, and then you grind it to fine flour, then you pre-digest it, then you cook it and do all these steps, and then you these full refined ingredients you reformulate into something which will have no structure or texture, which could withhold the speed of absorption of the release of glucose from another perspective. Then it's really the big problem. And when I'm being told that, okay, but then what happens to fat lipid processing, fat rich foods? Yeah, of course you can oxidize all those polyunsaturated fats. That's not a good thing. But I think it's really, or literally, just fuel to the fire. You create the high oxidative stress environment, and then you add the easily oxidizable lipids on top. Then you have the perfect storm. Of course, you can accelerate it even further.
That's what
But
everyone's eating, by the way. Everyone's eating the refined foods plus the seed oils and fried, whatever. No good.
yeah. That makes it even worse, no doubt. But even lipid absorption is tightly connected to glucose absorption. Few people, or not really the absorption, but the release into your lymphatics, because long chain lipids are not released in the blood from the intestinal tract, but to the lymphatic circulation. But the speed and the size of the chylomicrons, the lipoproteins which contain dietary lipids, and then secreted by the intestinal cells, it's the high glucose makes it change in a way that these chylomicrons grow disproportionately large, and they contain so much triglycerides that these arrive to your fat storage, the fat cells cannot take all up, and then you have these triglyceride-rich remnants making circles around and doing a lot of harm. But that's also partly, at least, due to the glucose, because quickly available glucose to intestinal cells make them release these chylomicron, make them grow, add more triglycerides, and then get rid of them as soon as possible. So you start releasing these huge lipid-rich particles. That's also linked through glucose. So if you eliminate this glucose part, all those lipoprotein particles will become normal again, and your fat storage can deal with them.
Mm. Well, this is the kind of problem. Well, a lot of people have success going either like very fat based or very even sugar, like carb based. And it seems like there's a problem when you have them both. Not necessarily, you don't have to say never eat fat and carbs together. I think in the context of whole foods, you think it's better. But how big a problem is it just that the fat and the refined fats mainly and the refined carbs at the same time could be bad?
Yeah, I think there is a nice trick to fructose, for example. A lot of people will despise me for saying this, but actually, if you eat something sweet as a dessert at the end of, for example, you have a fully ketogenic meal, and then you add a small dessert, your satiety will last considerably longer. And that's because is fructose is will not trigger a GIP and then insulin response. It only triggers a GLP-1. That that's the drug which they give diabetics.
The
This
semaglutide
Yeah,
stuff.
yeah, the GLP-1
Oh, semaglutide.
agonists
Yep.
like
Yeah.
Wegovy and whatever. They have a lot of semaglutide and all kind of glutids. Those are the GLP-1 agonists. That's the miracle drugs, kind of. But this hormone is of course this hormone of course exists in the body, and this is mainly released by lower intestinal sensor cells. And fructose doesn't trigger the more harmful high release of the upper small intestinal hormones. It only triggers the lower small intestinal hormones, this GLP-1, for example. So it can contribute to satiety in a great way, as long as you don't overdo it and don't include a lot of glucose with it, a lot of quick absorbing glucose, because then it is absorbed at the upper small intestine and you lose all of its benefits and it becomes harmful to the liver. But actually, if you eat a full ketogenic meal and add a small bout of sugar at the end, it makes it last longer.
Well, it's interesting. Well, I mean, I don't tell people, yeah, go eat a Twix bar after you eat a meal, but you can eat fruit as a good example, or yeah, try to do like a
Yeah,
healthy.
if you have no goals of being in high level of ketosis all the time, so you don't have to follow a therapeutic ketogenic diet, then I think it's a good hack to
Yeah.
increase satiety.
Well, let's not even call it a ketogenic diet. I mean, so you can eat a meal of a lot of protein and fat, right? An ancestral, like this is the stuff that we believe in, right? Eating meat and eggs and all this good stuff, and then have maybe some of the starchier stuff after for dessert or a fruit, which I love.
Yeah,
Yeah, I'm eating fruit for dessert. It's amazing. And I feel, yeah, I do feel really full. I feel like I've conquered hunger. I never feel hungry anymore. And then when it's time to eat, I can eat. I'm good. It's not like I have a problem, but it's I'm eating this whole food diet thoughtfully, kind of what you're saying.
yeah. The good thing is when practice and theories meet somewhere. So when you have a understanding which you believe it's mechanistic, and then when you try it out in real life and it works, that's really a nice feedback.
Hmm. It is. Okay, so I hope we didn't lose people with some of the science talk. We got kind of detailed. Maybe just before we move on, recap kind of our first conversation years ago where you talked about the gut incretins and GIP and GLP-1 and just smaller, the lower intestine, lower and higher in the digestive tract, and how that. Can you just try to do a quick kind of high level view of what's going on there?
Yeah, I think that brings us back really to the speed of absorption. Because if you can delay absorption, that basically means that you move this absorption process from the upper part of the small intestine to the lower part. And the basic reason you should do this is a kind of an anatomical fact that the sensors in our gut are not evenly distributed. These are distributed, one is like a funnel, and the other like a upside down funnel. So we have two kinds of basic hormones which are responsible for the majority of insulin release, but they have their individual actions in the body, in satiety, for example. And if one is overstimulated, the upper part, it can really have similarly bad effects as very high insulin peaks. They kind of complement each other. One is largely responsible for the release of the other. By the way, that's why it's called an incretin. But when you manage to a little bit understimulate the upper type and overstimulate, so move this absorption zone lower, delay the absorption, then these other types of hormones, which are much more beneficial, are stimulated to a much greater extent. And you can really reap all the benefits of satiety, long-term satiety, a kind of lower fat storage signal, and so on and so forth.
It's
So
kind of
that's
better
the very
hormonal,
basics.
yeah, better hormonal regulation of
Yeah,
all.
it boils down to this uneven anatomical distribution of these two types of sensors. And actually, that's an extremely good question. Why we have this uneven distribution of these sensors? Evolutionarily, we have developed that one is more abundant in the upper part, and the other is more abundant in the lower part. Why not have evenly distributed both?
Do you have an idea?
I have an idea that it has to do with availability of food and then reacting to environmental changes, so that you can gain weight and be more resistant to immune challenges. For example, when there are problems with food availability. I think it probably has to do with, but I don't have a perfect answer. I asked this question a couple of times and I still don't no, I think somebody who can finally provide a definitive or a nearly definitive answer will be a big guy in metabolic
Well,
research.
no, it makes sense. For some time, for most of history, we wanted to fatten up for the winter a bit, and so there are mechanisms that allowed us to do that. And yeah, I've done different podcasts on that. That makes sense too. And also, well, I just think it's just what we had available. We did not have highly processed foods available, so it's just we weren't set up for it. If you kind of think of like what's wrong now, our environment's completely different now. We have processed foods everywhere, and we're just not set up. Our gut is just however it got made, right? If there was this evolutionary pressure to do it a certain way, it's not set up to eat Twix bars and candy and cereal and all that. It's just not.
Yeah, but you are being told that you can lose weight if you eat all the Twixes and these kind of things, if you count the calories. But it totally misses the point that it's extremely difficult to do. Because you have to really count how much you eat and then observe that okay, am I still losing weight or not, and then you can do it, but it's totally pointless, because if you just fix the food environment, then you naturally should revert to a healthy behavior.
Yeah, I've been thinking about this. Actually, I was thinking about it last night. It's like no one's denying that it's possible to just eat less of the same bad foods and lose weight. I mean, it's possible, yes, but it's very hard and it's not long term healthy. And it's kind of like I was trying to think of a good analogy. Just I don't know, gas, right? There's the regular gas and there's premium. If your car takes premium, we all should take premium. Like we are humans, Homo sapiens, we need the premium animal meat, red meat, eggs, fat, all this good stuff. So yes, you can eat the bad gas, right? Put the bad gas in your car, and maybe it's cheaper, but it, it's not going to work long term. Your car is going to break down because it's just lower quality gas. It's just not what it needs. Maybe there's a better analogy out there, but it's just not what your body needs. No matter what, it doesn't have all the components of what your body
Yeah,
needs.
I think it's not a bad analogy at all.
Yeah, it's not getting the protein and the nutrients that you need. So you're always going to be lacking in it. It's almost like you I like this nutrient leverage hypothesis, kind of extension of the protein leverage hypothesis, is that your body's going to eat until it gets what it needs. So there's only two options. Either you're going to overeat to get it, and then you could put on fat, or you could undereat to try to force yourself to lose weight, but you won't be getting all the nutrients you need.
Yeah, I think overeating doesn't necessarily equal gaining weight,
That's
because
another.
there are at least two different phases of excess energy. You can also burn it.
Yes.
And when I, if you remember, I talked about this butter on Brazil nuts.
Mhm.
And what I felt was that I was in the evenings. It was very difficult to fall asleep because I was all kind of overheating. I felt it was hot, and I had to get rid of the blanket, and my heart was bumping like crazy. So my body probably just wanted to get rid of that excess energy, so to say.
That's super good point. That's why I brought it up. We were going to go into this. Is people used to be able to eat a lot more calories. I think if you're eating the right foods, you should be able to burn a lot of calories. Your body will burn those off. Your metabolism will work better. So if people who try to force themselves with eating the bad food but just less of it, they're screwing up their metabolism and their body. And I've seen it too in people's blood labs. It's like lower thyroid function, lower body temperature too, right? It's like if it sounds what you just said, your body temperature was higher because your body was working correctly because you're eating the right foods, you're eating natural fats, and it was just working to burn it off more. And some people, they're eating the wrong diet. They screw up their thyroid. There's so many women, especially out there, because they're constantly dieting, right? There's this whole different thing going on with society and women and this and that, whatever. They have a lot of thyroid function problems.
Yeah, there are a couple of studies which I think repeatedly showed that at higher turnover levels, it's much easier for the body to regulate weight. So actually, this crap advice of eat less and move more. My advice is eat more and move more, because at higher turnover levels, it's much easier for the body to regulate body weight.
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to eat
Eat
more.
more of the good foods, of course.
Eat more of the good foods, of course. Yeah. And I've seen it work. And that's why there's been people over the years, many years that, yeah, they're like, I'm eating more calories than ever, and more calories than the equation says that I should be, gaining weight on, and they don't because they're eating the right foods. Well, okay. I want to go back to one thing I just remembered. We talked about the obese 800-pound person that had to take the wall out to get them out. And you said that they weren't diabetic. Super interesting stuff. I think that the audience may not have totally understood that. It's that your body's trying to protect yourself so you can gain more fat cells and not become diabetic. So kind of explain that.
Yeah, it seems that, and that's what I call the central problem of adipogenesis. Adipogenesis is the generation of more fat, mainly through the addition of new fat cells. So that's called adipogenesis, when you have these progenitors like stem cells in the fat tissue and the so-called pre-adipocytes, which are ready to become mature fat cells. And some people seem to have an endless capacity to add new fat cells and become whatever obese they can be without the mechanistic strain of uh, constricting the living conditions. Yeah, and but there is also the other extreme, those people with lipodystrophy who have no proper fat storage under their skins. So these are very thin people you can see the blood vessels, the veins under their skins, because there is no subcutaneous um, fat, basically. And they usually have a bit of a belly. Their internal organs are full of fat which cannot be stored under their skin. And these people are profoundly diabetic.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of the other extreme. And these observations give basis to the so-called personal fat threshold hypothesis, which is, I think, an interesting hypothesis. But when you really look deeply into it, you find that it's not really able to explain most observations. So I think it's a good and interesting model, but I think we shouldn't stop here, and we should pursue even better hypotheses.
It can explain most, or it can explain some.
Yeah, I think that the problem is that this personal fat threshold kind of posits that you have a genetic predisposition, which is very strong. It's almost carved in stone how much or how many fat cells you can add, and then you have this capacity. And when you overcome this, you are doomed.
So
And I
can
think
I explain it? Can I explain a little more? Because so some people, like these 800-pound people, they have the genetic predisposition to be able to gain tons and tons of fat cells. So when they keep eating too much energy, right? I always differentiate nutrients from energy, right? It's not like this person ate too many, steak and eggs. They ate too many excess energy, empty calories. Then they have no place. Oh, they have lots of places to store that fat in their subcutaneous fat. Some people, like you mentioned, in the extreme case, the lipid dystrophy people, they have no place to store that fat. So it goes straight into visceral fat. And then they have all the problems with the visceral fat. So that's why some people in Asia, they in general have a lower body mass, lower fat mass, and they can still have type 2 diabetes and other metabolic problems. So generally, that's what the personal fat threshold says, is that when you run out of subcutaneous fat, your body has to store it into visceral fat, and then that's when you start getting the real problems.
Yeah, but I think that the proponents kind of posit that it has a lot to do with genetics, and it
Yeah.
also has a very strong individual basis, so that you have a certain strict threshold which cannot change, and then you are doomed if you overfill your fat cells. But there is a lot of evidence which speaks against this. So there are many factors or parameters which you follow on a population basis. You find very good correlations. But when you look at the individual, the correlation doesn't exist anymore. So it changes when you look at hundreds or thousands of people or millions. It's very different when you look at an individual and try to say that you have this personal fat threshold and you can do whatever you want. You will be diabetic this and that time because you cannot gain more fat. And I think that's really faulty, because there are many examples. Some of the most interesting ones are, for example, that there's a study which shows that the Japanese in the US are able to gain a lot more fat without becoming diabetic than what they can gain in Japan. Why is that? I mean, the genetics won't change if you move from Japan to the US. Obviously, it's the environment which changes. And then there is the sumo wrestler example. Sumo wrestlers are obese, often morbidly obese, but they are never diabetic. When they stop their traditional food practices, feeding practices, and the exercise, they can become diabetic in months. So what changed? Obviously, their personal fat threshold, which is mainly genetic, according to proponents, couldn't change in months. That's nonsense. I mentioned another example that there is a study, very recent study, where I don't know how many dozens or hundreds of people lost weight. It was a weight loss study, but they measured a lot of other things. It's good when you have a study population, and then you can peel off a lot of studies later, a lot of papers from the same study, because you measure fact parameters which were not part of the core design. And these guys also measured insulin sensitivity along with the weight loss. And what they found was that approximately a quarter of the participants didn't or couldn't improve their insulin sensitivity, their metabolic health, despite similar amounts of weight lost compared to the other three quarters. So the three quarters go along with the personal fat hypothesis that your fat cells become less full and then your metabolic health improves. But what about this 20 or 25% of participants who lost similar amounts of weight, but their metabolic health didn't improve? Was it then what happened to the fat threshold? I cannot explain it with the personal fat threshold hypothesis.
Well, what do you think? Well, first of all, I don't know. I don't agree. It's not like I'm saying the personal fat threshold is my thing and it's set in stone. And this is actually better news. And I like this model that you're talking about. It's sort of a modified version of the personal fat threshold. That something about that is correct, but also you have control, right? You're not genetically doomed. That just because you have this certain
Yeah,
threshold,
yeah. At
screwed.
least not totally doomed. There is certainly a genetic factor, but there is also a strong environmental component which can be changed, and then you can
Exactly.
either gain more weight or even despite losing weight, you won't improve your metabolic health. So that should be factored in, and the hypothesis is refined in
That's
some
good.
way.
Yeah, there's more to it. There's always more to it. Super complicated. You can't just say it's like the simplest thing ever. But so okay, so but what do you think is going on with those people that so because weight loss 'cause generally everyone agrees that weight loss will improve metabolic health. So why didn't it improve in these certain people?
Yeah, the problem is that even though they measured a lot of stuff, they didn't measure anything else which could give us a clue about what it could be. Personally, I think or I speculate that it was the immune environment which haven't changed. So the level of inflammation in their fat tissue, in their liver, and so on and so forth, changed very little along with the fat loss. And why? That's another important question which we should be investigating. But at this point, I think I could only just further speculate and ever more vaguely
Well,
speculate.
yeah, speculation is never good, but we'll try to do a little speculation. Maybe you're talking about the gut, right? And that this barrier could be a problem. So if this person lost weight while just eating less bad food, quote, bad food, they could just be eating, yeah, the same diet, just less of it. That's kind of going along with what we're talking about is that yes, they could lose some weight, but they could still have this inflammation, right? They could still have this bad gut permeability.
Yeah, in simple terms, I would say we talked about this a bit earlier. They haven't changed the signaling. So they changed something measurable like weight, but weight is not the most important parameter to measure here when you are talking about metabolic health. It's the signaling. If the signaling doesn't change, then your health status won't change
Yeah,
either.
I mean, that makes sense to me, like, if you have a problem with all these grains and gluten and or if there's pesticides on the grains or you have all these other foods, anti-nutrients, and then you're just eating less of them, but your gut can still be totally inflamed and your immune system is still no good.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's mainly the immune signaling which I would implicate in changing very little and then causing the same level of the persistence of the insulin resistance.
Well, let's get into immune stuff a bit more. My cholesterol went up, whatever 9 years ago I started my health journey. I started eating more meat and fat and stuff like that, less processed foods, less oils. And my cholesterol, my LDL went up, but I haven't been sick. I mean, barely, barely, barely been sick in 9 years. Like I really can't name like a real time where I was sick. So, what's going on?
Um, I think LDL is not a good marker of metabolic health, and metabolic health is a good marker of future health outcomes in general. So that's the disconnect there. Some people have some understanding of heart disease or atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease, as it's called, and LDL plays a part, or the ApoB or whatever, which is correlated with LDL, plays some part. But I think it's not the most important part, and the tunnel view prevents these people from seeing the bigger picture. And but I think they are probably honestly convinced that if you have high LDL, you will develop cardiovascular disease much sooner compared to having lower LDL. So there is probably good faith in it, but good faith and poor understanding, what I
Mhm.
would say.
It seems like there is something. Well, what do you think changed in my immune system? Why did my immune health get so much better? Because I used to get sick all the time. I was a classic American getting sick every few months.
Yeah, I think you need to look into the role of lipoproteins in immune function. Most people tend to look at these lipoproteins as single boats which carry different lipids around in the circulation, but that's very far from the truth. These lipoproteins have very strong roles in immune function,
Hmm.
immune support function, and nothing exemplifies this better than what happens when you get an infection. What happens to your lipoproteins? So in most cases, all your lipoproteins drop like a stone. So your LDL goes down, your HDL goes down, your triglycerides go up, but everything else seems to drop. But there is at least one exception. When you have intestinal inflammation, your LDL tends to go up. So that's more similar to certain types of metabolic disease. When you have intestinal inflammation, your LDL remains the same or even goes up. Your HDL drops and your triglycerides increase. Does that remind you of anything? Triglycerides up, HDL down, LDL same or bit above normal. I think that's called insulin resistance, or
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think the mainstream model of the lipids is just so bad, and I guess people listening should know that. I did so many episodes on this with so many people: Dave Feldman, Ivor Cummins, you kind of, and then Dr. Seema Holtra, Dr. Brett Scher, Dr. Nadir Ali, three cardiologists as well. People can go back to those episodes. Uh, okay, what about the liver? I feel like the liver is kind of the center of a lot of metabolic health, and I've done some self experimentation as well, and it just seems like the liver is this thing. I mean, yeah, people have fatty liver. Basically, anyone who has metabolic dysfunction has fatty liver. And can you kind of get more detail into this?
specifically about fatty liver.
Well, just about how, I mean, I feel like it starts for me. Okay, I'll say my self experimentation. It's kind of me going on vacation. Say I go back home to Hawaii once a year and I kind of lose my good practices and have a bit more fun with my friends, and I can immediately see what goes on, and it seems to be centered around the liver. It's like I will have a few drinks and I will have a little bit of this processed food, and it just seems like these two things, the alcohol and the processed food, immediately go to your liver and start metabolic haywire.
Yeah, that's because it happens as you described, I believe. So actually, alcohol and quick absorbing sugars act very similarly in the body. So I think there is just a thin line between alcoholic and non-alcoholic fatty liver disease because the mechanisms are so close. Um, yeah, there is one. That's also not a big difference because I wanted to say that alcohol acutely suppresses lipolysis, the fat outflow from storage. But chronic alcohol consumptions, when you day after day consume higher amounts, it will result in an uncontrolled outflow of fat from storage. But actually, it's exactly what happens in high refined carb consumption. that refined carbs, due to the high insulin response, are very good acutely to suppress the fat outflow from storage. But when you chronically consume, resistance builds up, and then this becomes very poorly controlled, and then these free fatty acids, despite the high insulin level, will keep hitting your liver, and your liver will try to get rid of it through increased VLDL release. That's why your triglycerides go up. And this is exactly the same process in the two conditions, which are not really two very different conditions, just different compounds doing very similar things in the body.
Well, yeah, I mean, and you look at the standard American diet and all the people with health problems, and it's a lot of people are doing these things. They're drinking alcohol in excess and they're eating processed foods and refined carbs in excess, and it goes to their liver can't handle it. They start getting fatty liver, then visceral fat starts to develop. Is that yeah, is that what's going on? And I remember in the first episode we talked about the beer belly too. You're talking about a protective mechanism, right?
Yeah, yeah. I think it's only what I probably nobody, but I definitely don't properly understand what happens first, because we can observe a lot of things like increased levels of bacterial junk, kind of, these endotoxins, lipopolysaccharide, uh, moving from the gut to the liver and to the visceral fat based lymph nodes, and when any organ in the body is challenged, it tends to respond with growth, with adaptation. So I think that's exactly what happens to your liver when it grows, fatty liver grows, and also what happens to the visceral fat when it's being challenged. Then it grows, it tries to adapt, and if you view this visceral fat depot as a kind of a filter uh, from between the gut and the systemic circulation, it plays a filter role through those lymph nodes. uh, there come the chylomicrons. We talked about these dietary lipid containing lipoproteins. Lipids are not water soluble, so they are incorporated into these fat bubbles, small fat balls called lipoproteins. This is from, in the case of dietary lipids, it's mainly chylomicrons. And then you have these chylomicrons, but these also contain other fat soluble compounds, which are taken up together with the lipids. And for example, these are the lipopolysaccharides, which consist of a lipid A part and the sugar chains part. And the lipid A part is fat soluble, makes it fat soluble, and then it's taken up together with the dietary lipids. The interesting thing is that a diet rich in refined carbohydrates and added fats makes it so that you produce your bacteria shift, the composition of your bacteria shift in a way that you start producing more of this endotoxin, this bad type of lipopolysaccharide, and the added fat helps it be absorbed into these chylomicrons. So you have more of them, and even more of them reaching your systemic circulation due to the increased absorption via the lipids. So this is one way to explain what happens when you mix refined carbohydrates with added fats, why it's bad. And then with this is a very, very oversimplified kind of model. But with this, you can already explain why a carb free or extremely low carb diet could work, and why a extremely low fat
Mm-hmm.
and high carb diet could work. Because in one case, when you are very low carb, you have high fat absorption, but you have very low production of these lipopolysaccharides due to not feeding the bugs with the quick absorbing glucose. You just eliminate one important component of this pathway. And if you are very high carb and low fat, you may have, depending on the high carb diet, but even high sugar and high starch diet, if you are extremely low fat, you prevent the absorption of these inflammatory compounds. So even you overproduce, perhaps greatly overproduce these lipopolysaccharides, endotoxins, it's not being absorbed. So you don't see the problem, and your metabolic health can improve. I think it's a very interesting oversimplified model.
It is interesting because a lot of people want to know how these people that are very plant based or they're very high carb, low fat, how does that work? And that's a great explanation of it. So we're running out of time here. So just before we go, I have two small things. Because you said the visceral fat kind of acts as a filter, and I was kind of mentioning the beer belly. And can you just explain that a little more in sort of more simplistic terms?
Yeah, we already talked about these chylomicrons, which the interesting thing is the different length of fat chains are absorbed differently. So when you are eating short chain fatty acid like acetic acid, or your bacteria produce these short chain fatty acid like butyrate and other stuff, and also the medium chain triglycerides, in coconut oil or caprylic acid and all this C8, C10, whatever. These are absorbed directly into the blood, and the blood in your gut goes to the liver. That's why it's called a separate circulation, called the portal circulation, because there is a port, a gate in the liver which receives all this stuff from the gut, nutrients, bad bacteria compounds, everything. It has a very high proportion of immune cells due to this. That from the gut there can be a lot of bacterial parts, for example, arriving to the liver, and this portal area of the liver is another immune filter basically in itself. But other nutrients like long chain fatty acids, these are absolutely not fat soluble, so they have to be incorporated into these fat outside, uh, water soluble outside, and fat inside particles, which are the lipoproteins. Among them, one is the chylomicron released by the gut, and the dietary triglycerides are disassembled when being absorbed by enzymes, and then reassembled into triglycerides again, and then incorporated into these carrying particles. And these carrying particles are released into the lymphatic circulation, not into the blood. So they take a completely different route. I think this is another very interesting question: why it has evolved this way, that it goes around and not straight to the liver. I think that's because it has a different destination, first of all, and then also that it requires some kind of pre-processing before hitting the systemic circulation. It can contain even higher amounts of bacterial stuff, which can be inflammatory. And if you can filter this out before reaching the systemic circulation, then it can be kind of how to say, demilitarized by the immune system. And the immune system, what does this are the is found in the lymph nodes. These are immune structures. So you have the lymphatic vessel coming from the gut, and there is a node, a bulb sitting on the vessel, and it has a lot of immune cells, and it filters everything which comes, and trains the immune cells, sends these trained immune cells back to the gut, and so on and so forth. But the really interesting thing is, I think, is the filtering out, or sensing these bacterial compounds. And if they are increased, there is a stronger immune reaction in these lymph nodes. And all of these lymph nodes are embedded in fat tissue, often called visceral fat. Is the structure of the mesentery. It's a continuous fatty and connective tissue attached to the gut, to the bowels. And I believe that when it's continuously being challenged by these infiltrating bacterial inflammatory compounds, it just takes up the challenge, and expands. So you have bigger lymph nodes, you have bigger surrounding fat tissues, which supply it with the specific fatty acids. Your immune cells always require these polyunsaturated fats to generate or to calm inflammation. You need omega 6s, you need omega 3s. So there need to be fat cells which can specifically react to this immune challenge to support these immune structures, the lymph nodes. And I believe that's why it becomes bigger and bigger as an attempt to increase the filtration capacity to simplify it down to.
Yeah, so I'll try to simplify it here. Basically, visceral fat or just gaining a beer belly, even or just some of the subcutaneous fat, is your body trying to protect itself. It wants to maintain homeostasis. It doesn't want you diabetic. It doesn't want all this. So basically, it means this is a warning sign that everyone's ignoring. If you have like kind of like a pooch, even if some people they have like the low body mass, low muscle mass, and then the little pooch belly, that could be very dangerous. That could be you basically metabolic dysfunction. Your body's not getting the right foods and it's trying to protect itself. It's putting on the visceral fat, it's protecting the organs, all this stuff. And you got to stop, you got to change something. And so many people don't. And it's just basically a sign, a warning sign like, hey, you are eating the wrong foods. And all this signaling, you got into all these details about why it's going on. But in the simplest terms, it's it's causing dysfunction in your body and you need to change your foods. You need to go to these unprocessed versions. You need to get the protein, the fat, the good nutrients. And in the whole form, you talked about breaking down, especially starches and carbohydrates. The more you break them down, you break up the cellular structure, it interacts with your gut quicker and it causes problems. So that the solution here, if we gave some advice out to people listening, is just go more to what your body expects. If you give your body what it expects and what it's had for all of history, you're going to change your metabolism and correct it and not have all these problems.
Yeah, yeah. I think I always say that biology is usually not about mass but function. And within function, I mean mainly the signaling what goes on. And but masses on a population level and to some extent also at the individual level can provide useful information and can be the basis for future actions, the interventions you should take. Because, for any individual, a certain amount of belly fat, I mean, visceral fat, the beer belly type of deposition, can mean anything. On a spectrum of metabolic health, it can be almost perfectly healthy and can be really, really bad. But you cannot tell it before measuring your metabolic
Mm.
markers. So it's probably there, or it's most certainly there to protect you. But the protecting involves some adverse changes, and you shouldn't. I never encourage people to have more or keep the visceral fat mass, but I still think of visceral fat as a protective mechanism. So it increased to protect you. It's not increased. I think without the increase, you would even worse off
You were.
than with this increase.
So you're not saying, yeah, like try to gain visceral fat, but this is the last nuance I wanted to bring up is that it's not like you have to be this shredded, like physique competitor with shredded abs at every second of your life. Like that's just too much. And you could have other problems with your hormones and stuff. And this is before we got on air, we're talking about Dr. Sean O'Mara, who's awesome. He's great. He's really into visceral fat. But you told me that, maybe he's going a little too far where it's like, we can't have any visceral fat. This is killing you, when you're saying that's not really the case.
Yeah, I agree that if you have a beer belly, that signals that there are some problems, and you got to measure what the actual problems are because it's a spectrum, and just by the mass, it's on an individual level, it's not certain that how bad you are doing. There is, for example, a big difference between males and females from this respect. Males seem to be able to tolerate more visceral fat mass because we have evolved with a bigger, greater tendency to invest in the immune functions of visceral fat, and without that, we would be diabetic much earlier, I believe. It's also a matter of different ratios, most likely. Like women tend to have a lot more subcutaneous fat, especially lower body, like buttocks and thighs and so on, which are mostly protective. So if you have big buttocks, fatty and thick thighs with a lot of subcutaneous fat, that can compensate to some extent for some of the visceral fat. Because I think uh, immunity and adiposity always come and work together to some extent, and the metabolic functions of visceral fat can be taken over by subcutaneous fat, but not really the immune functions. So that's how these other fat depots can likely protect more.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think there's very if you're eating a correct diet, if you're eating whole foods and you're a woman and you have a a little bit of fat, that could be completely fine. Yeah, I like this message. It's not like you don't have to look like a bikini competitor to be healthy, but it's just so few people out there are actually eating a good diet, you
Yeah,
know.
yeah. It's always the metabolic markers at the end of the day.
Yeah.
It's not really about the masses, but what size of subcutaneous fat mass you have on your buttocks or thighs, or what size of beer belly. It's you better measure the metabolic markers, like how you react to a challenge, like an OGTT or a mixed meal tolerance test, and check your glucose, insulin, triglycerides, for example, in response to a mixed challenge meal.
Mhm. Absolutely. And the last thing with Sean O'Mara, good friend of mine, but he goes a little too extreme. He's just like, you can never eat fruit. You can never do this. He's just like so into this, trying to have zero visceral fat. I mean, I'm already at the very bottom end of the spectrum. Like I'm bottomed out on the visceral fat. I did a little test, and yeah, I'm good
Yeah,
enough.
perhaps most of his patients are already deranged to an extent that they cannot really tolerate anything else than the perfect diet. What Sean believes is the one to correct for these problems. But I think for any given individual who is not deranged to that extent, there is likely a much greater tolerance remaining yet.
Exactly. And yeah, once you go on your journey, and then that you kind of fix your metabolism, then you can have a different diet. You don't have to be so strict, really. Awesome. Thank you so much. Are you online at all? Like, do you do much writing, tweeting? What do you do?
Yeah, I've been on Twitter a little bit throttled since the pandemic, because I had some views not fully compatible with the authorities, and then I remained throttled for whatever reason. And yeah, we also have a joint venture kind of with Ivor Cummins called Metabolic Duo. We have a online session every other week on different topics, and yeah, that's mainly it these days. I'm not really on Facebook. I almost stopped all activities in my group, unfortunately, but it's not the right platform to have really good discussions, I think.
Well, you're having the right discussions. You and Ivor are on the right side. I'm with you guys. I don't know about these authorities. I don't think they're very correct in a lot of things, and but we won't go into that. But people can check you out on Twitter. Check out Metabolic Duo with Ivor, and thanks so much.
Yeah, thanks so much for inviting back. It's been a pleasure.
All right, good stuff. Take care.
Okay, thanks a lot.